Hello, welcome back to the CW. This is an odds and ends video. So I am aware that the last thing that I said in the last video was about taking a step back from making the clothes and doing a couple of other things, and I have done those things. But also, the first thing that I did after making that video was to immediately jump back into making the coat. So I don't know if that makes me a masochist, or if there was some kind of negativity that I was airing out in that video, and once I'd got out of my head, I was sort of able to work on it again without feeling too bitter about it. So that's something I did. That was the last bit of her clothing. I've also made her boots. That was something I've been putting off because I wasn't quite sure how to do it. I did an animation test for her eyes because I have been wondering about how to do that. And I also have been doing some printing tests with, I've been using a new material, PETG, which is supposedly harder than PLA, which is what I was using before. And I hope that that is better at keeping the joints stiff, because at the moment I'm having problems with the joints becoming a bit too loose, and she's got a bit floppy as I've been sort of manipulating her. I've also got a different sized nozzle, it's smaller this time, so hopefully that means that the detail will be a lot finer, the ball and sockets will be smoother, so hopefully that doesn't sort of create any errant friction in there, or more than I would want. The face will be smoother, so it'll be easier to sort of mask the texture when I come to paint it. And it also means that details like the ears, I was having a bit of problem with those before, if you remember, those will come out nicer, more solid. So hopefully that all works well. Alright, so I'm going to talk about the coats now that I've just made. This is the last iteration that I showed in the last video. I switched over to a different material, which is this. I think it's bamboo cotton or something like that. But as you can see, it's stretchy, and it's got a lot of floppiness to it. I think they call that the drape. I really like that. But the only problem is that when I come to do the double-sided things, see there, so this rain guard is two of the same pieces that have been sewn together like that and then folded outwards. You can see on the side this is quite a sort of rounded edge. Let me get up, yeah, so on this one it's a lot crisper. You can see that corner is actually like a corner, whereas this one is more like a fillet, like a sort of rounded edge, rounded corner. And similarly with the collar as well, there's something about it that was too sort of round. Basically, it's not as sharp as I wanted it to be. Like I'd expect a trench coat to be. If you look at one, particularly the really lightweight ones, they do very sort of geometric lines, whereas this is very wobbly in comparison. So what I did was I used an interfacing layer. So this is Sally's coat, and as you can see, I finished it. So obviously, I'm happy with it. But I'll get on to why I like it in a second. You can see these white lines here, that's the interfacing layer on the inside of it. And what this did was basically, the drape is still really nice. It's still got a lot of flappiness to it as opposed to the twill. This is still a lot stiffer than this. It just doesn't have the kind of droopiness as the uninterfaced version of this. I've also left the edges, I don't know if you call it a live edge, that's what you'd call it in woodworking when you still got the bark. But essentially I haven't done anything with this. So you can see it's fraying slightly, and that's why you can see the interfacing layer on the inside. And I think I'm okay with this. The sharpness of the corners, you can see, obviously that's a right 90-degree angle, that is as well, is more important to me than having these sort of slightly strange white edges. And also the collar as well, it's cleaner, sharper. I think when I come to film, I'm probably going to go around with some small scissors and just trim off these edges, because they are a bit unprofessional. But I think generally, you can see there, that there's, you can barely see the interfacing layer underneath it, so I think that's okay to keep it like that. So yeah, apart from that, I changed the shape of the back a bit so that it's more cinched in the middle. I know she's got a belt, but I just wanted to have that be naturally in that shape anyway. For completeness reasons, I don't know. It just looked better to me when I didn't have the belt on. I've got ahead and put on all the sort of accessories as well. I've made these brass buttons and these brass sort of belt loops and things like that. The tabs on the sleeves, The belt, obviously, this is like an old shoelace. That was white, and I painted it green. Had quite a lot of fun, like colour matching things. I always liked that about my old job when I was making models. I would like have quite a lot of different colours in the spray booth when we were like spray painting laser cut things and things like that. I really liked mixing those colours and like getting the exact shade. It's always really fun. But then also, you have to know what it's going to dry to look like. It's all well and good like matching it when it's wet, but when it dries it becomes a slightly different colour, so you always get like a slight difference in there. But I think I did a fairly okay job with this. It is slightly different. I don't know if the camera's picking it up, but in reality it's like slightly greyer than the material, but I think that's okay. It looks cohesive within the ensemble. So yeah, I think that worked really well. The only thing I'm slightly unsure about is like how her collar is like really big. Like it goes around her neck quite far out, whereas like on a real coat you'd expect it to be fairly close. Judging from what happened to all of the other coats as I was making them, I don't think this is really a particularly easy problem to fix. So I'm just going to leave it like that. I think that's okay. I think it worked out quite well. The buttons are slightly misaligned, but I don't think anyone's really going to care too much about that. I certainly don't. But yeah, I'm happy with that. And I'm glad that that is finally over, because this has caused me a lot of grief. Yeah, sweet. Alright, so talking about Sally's boots. My first thought about making Sally's boots was to do something similar to how I made her clothes, where I would have her anatomy in 3D print underneath, and then construct a boot around it. I mean, I guess exactly like how you'd wear a normal boot. But I realised that that would probably be quite a difficult thing to do, because trying to make a boot that is this small I think would be quite difficult, and trying to get it to maintain its shape and also like put it on in the first place might end up being quite a monumental task. So what I decided to do instead was to print the lower part of the boot. So this works in exactly the same way as the foot, so it interfaces with her ankle like that. And what I do with this is make the boot slightly smaller and then clad it with leather or fake leather or something like that, so that it could have the structure there. It could still have the movement of this ankle, and it would be able to go up to here without constricting very much movement. So up here, the leather would be standing on its own, and down here it would be stuck to this boot. The first version that I did is this. And you can see that you can see just the sole of the printed boot here. That was another reason why I wanted to do this. I'm sort of vaguely following the shape or the construction of the boot. So I've got this toe cap here, I've got a tongue in there, and the two flaps around the edge that get tied together. So that's how it looks on here. It's alright. I think this is too narrow. This shape here is a bit strange. Looking at actual boots, what seems to happen is the heel here is quite round, and it goes in at this point here. And then the top part goes out in a bit of a funnel shape, whereas this one is like straight all the way up and down. The other thing I don't really like is the shoelaces. What I did here was unravel a piece of string, but it's a bit furry. Let's zoom in. You can see there's a lot of like fluff coming off it. And I also tried this with some thread that I've been using to sew the garments together, this stuff. This is a lot thinner than that, as you can see. So what I did was I braided a couple of pieces together, but even so, it was still very like uneven. There were parts where the braid was a lot denser and parts where it was a lot looser. So it didn't have a sort of uniform size as you might expect from a standard shoelace. So I kind of didn't quite give up, but I decided to take another route and go for buckles instead. So the next iteration is this one, and I'm much happier with this shape here. The buckles are just piano wire, and it's similar to how I did her belt loop as well in her coat. That's with brass, and it's just a thicker piece. As I was talking before, I looked more at the shape of the boot, and I've got that kind of profile there, comes out here. And from the front, you can see it's a much more kind of natural shape, I suppose. One you might expect. I also paid a bit more attention to the pattern of the boot. So in the same way that I did the clothes, I worked out some paper patterns. It's actually really interesting shapes for this. This part is the sort of ankle of the boot here. So that goes on like that, and then wraps around to the side there. This little guy is filling in this space here, and you can see that line there. And then we have this piece, which is going over the toe, so it rolls over like that. The tongue as well. I could have stuck those two bits together like that, have that as one piece, but it was easier in the end to have this as a separate piece. I'm quite happy that I managed to do this in 2 takes, as opposed to like 4 or 5, like with the other pieces of clothing, because it saved me a lot of work. There's definitely things I can improve about it. The sole, for example, is a little bit blobby. You can see it's slightly uneven, and also like the way that I stuck the leather down, it's not always particularly uniform. But I reckon that these are going to be out of shot most of the time, and when they are in shot, they're definitely not the focus. So it's probably okay to have like flaws in them like that, because it's not going to be seen on camera. So there they are. I think they look quite good. Because I printed it in black first, I sort of had originally planned for the soles to be black as well, but I'm actually quite liking this colour. It sort of gives the boots an extra bit of flair that I quite like. And as you can see, like, she can still move her ankle. It is a little bit constricted because the leather wants to return to its original shape, but I reckon that probably won't need to actually move this joint too much. As I said, they're probably going to be out of frame, or not the focus of the frame, for most of the film, so, you know, I don't think that getting that full range of motion is that important. Alright, so in the previous segment you might have noticed Sally's eyes are painted white now, and this was because I wanted to test out an eye animation using digital methods, and this was just a quick way of getting the whites in her eyes rather than having to paint that on. The reason why I wanted to do this was because I was thinking about making her eyes move in a mechanical way. What that would entail is basically having eyeballs inside the headpiece, and you can see, like, compared to my thumb, how big that is. So the eyeballs themselves would be about that big, which is about the size of a pea, something like that. And there'd also need to be like a socket in there as well that would hold that and allow it to like rotate smoothly in the same way that the sort of arm sockets and shoulder sockets and things like that do. I guess that I was thinking they could just be sort of free floating in there, and that when I wanted to move them, I just sort of like rub them with my thumb like that, a bit like a ball bearing, and move them. But I reckoned that printing this kind of shape would be quite a difficult thing to do, not least because I'd need a way of getting the balls in there somehow, which would probably mean having to like cut this face up into pieces, like put the balls in and stick it back together, which would mean that there'd be lots of seams on the face itself, which would be more editing. The second idea I had was to sort of paint them in digitally on each frame, and I know that's still editing, but I feel like it could work a bit better. So what I would do is just paint the pupils or the irises into here on each frame, sort of like get a feel for how that works. So I think that turned out quite well. Looking at it back on a screen, it actually looks a lot better than what it looked like when I was drawing it, because I was zooming into the eyes like very, very close, and I could see all the sort of imperfections there. But when it comes to be like a smaller thing in frame, like if it's sort of like, I don't know, that big in frame, it's really not noticeable at all, which is great. It took about 2 hours to do that. For a 5-minute film, that's 30 times that, so 60 hours, which I guess isn't that bad. Like, if I'm having to like paint out the seams and do some various other things as well, frame by frame, it's probably not too much more to ask to do that. I know 60 hours seems like quite a lot, but in the scheme of things, it's not too bad, I don't think. So it's definitely like a feasible thing to do. As I get more into the production side of things, like once I've designed Awesome and I've done the sets and things like that, there's definitely going to be like ramping up a lot more of these animation tests. But for now, I think it's a promising start. I spoke before about doing some 3D print testing, and this is the results of that. So this is a sequence of tests. I started off here, and I worked my way across this line down through here, and then finally ended up with this one. So the reason I wanted to do this 3D print testing in the first place was because I was finding some looseness in Sally's body. Basically, the joints weren't quite as stiff as they used to be. This one is still okay, but there's a lot of joints, like in her legs and things like that, that are just slightly too floppy. You can see that it's not quite holding its position anymore. What I wanted to do was find a way to make those joints stay stiffer for longer, essentially. The material that I've been using up till now is a thing called PLA, which is polylactic acid, which is this purple stuff here. This is a good beginner-friendly material. It prints quite nicely and it's quite easy to set up, so that's why I went for it in the first place. However, PLA is quite a soft material, and I think what's happening with Sally is that the ball and sockets are grinding against each other and sort of wearing each other away. So I think that is why she's becoming looser over time. What I thought I'd do instead is to print her in PETG, which is this sort of pinky stuff here. Basically, this plastic is a lot stronger than PLA, so presumably the joints won't wear out quite as much. Another thing I wanted to do with the 3D prints is, you can see here, the seam is towards the back of her head and then follows her chin line. And I thought when I was sort of looking at this the other day, that her hairline actually starts here. So if I wanted to be changing faceplates out all the time, what would be really annoying is having her hair as part of that, because it would mean that I'd have to put hair on every single faceplate, which could be up to sort of 100 or so, and it'd have to be exactly the same between faces. Printing is not so bad because you print the same geometry over and over again, but with something that I'm doing by hand, that's going to be really tricky to do. So what I wanted to do was to bring this seam further forward, so it's below her hairline. And that way the face can just be the face, and the hair can always stay on the head, which will always stay consistent in the model. So that's what this first one is about. And you can see that her faceplate line is brought way down to there. This obviously, as you can see, is not printed the best. The seam is pretty awful. You can see that there's a lot of play in there. And also it's sort of difficult to print because there isn't any particular flat place to place it down on the bed. So a good way of printing is to have some flat area on the model. Let's demonstrate it with these ones, because these have a flat plane. You put that onto the bed like that, and that gives a good surface to sort of build up from. The problem with this is that there is no good place to do that. Any way that you orientate it, so I did it this way, there's always going to be a small point that it's resting on, and then all the rest of it has to be propped up with support material, which is sacrificial. So it's not particularly good practice to have a shape like this if you want a good print result. So basically what I did was to cut the face plate out in a way that left flat planes for both the faceplate and the head. So this is the final one, and you can see that that line is straight. So these two pieces go on the bed like that, and that prints really nicely, except when it doesn't. So a problem that I was having when I was printing it was that if you imagine that this is the bed here and it's sitting down like that, any overhang seemed to be doing this strange thing where it was going in like this. You can see that here. So this is meant to be more like this. If you compare those two, this is going straight out like that and going around in a nice smooth curve, whereas this one is going in and then around. So I wanted to fix this problem, but that turned out to be quite a lot more problematic than I thought it was going to be. So basically that is what all of this is testing here, trying to get that weird little kink out. I don't know how many of you have done 3D printing before, but when you get a spool of filament, the manufacturers tell you sort of guideline temperatures to print with, and you've got the temperature of the nozzle, which is actually where the plastic is extruding from, and you've got the temperature of the bed. And with PETG, a typical temperature range is 240 degrees C for the nozzle, and around 85 to 90 degrees C for the bed. So that was what I was pretty much doing for all of this. I was changing it a little bit, but not too much, because I didn't expect it to really work at temperatures outside of that range. But what ended up working was changing the bed from 90 degrees C to 60 degrees C, which is quite a lot of difference there. And that's what ended up having the most impact. As you can see, this shape here is exactly how I want it. And as you can see, the quality of this print is just really superb. When you compare it to this one, which used to be a really good quality when I was comparing it to all my older pieces, you can see all of this stuff on here. This is where I was sanding off floors and things like that. The seam is huge. All of this sort of like messiness where it was sitting on the bed. And there, you can see it's a lot smoother. But anyway, that's great. And I'm going to be using this on Sally going forwards. Whoops. Go on like that. There you go. You can see this joint is nice and stiff, and it works really nicely. So that's all from me, and also from Sally, this episode. Next episode, I think I'm going to be focusing on the OSAM design. For the time being, I'm really happy with where Sally is at the moment. Like, she's pretty much there as a model. There's a couple of things I still need to do to her. So like, I need to work out how her head's going to fit on, how I'm going to do that even. I'm going to need to be painting her. I need to print the rest of her body in that PETG stuff. But all of that stuff can be going on in the background, I feel. I think that for episodes going forward, I'm going to be focusing on OSAM. Hopefully, now that I've got the printing stuff sorted out, now that I've got a sort of idea about how to make clothes and how to design them, hopefully OSAM's work is not going to be taking 4 months or however long it took to do Sally. Hopefully it will be a lot shorter than that. So I feel like the project is really getting a lot of steam now. There's a lot of momentum behind it. And hopefully we can start work on the sets soon as well. That'll be a fun thing to do. I want to work on the storyboard a bit more. I want to work on the scripts a bit more. And all of that is going to be happening pretty soon, which is exciting. So if you want to join me for that stage of the journey, then I'll be very happy to have you. I hope you enjoyed this video. I did a little bit more work on sort of transitions and chapter titles, things like that this time. So I hope it's a bit more interesting to watch. I'm going to try and do a bit more sort of process video work in later videos. I realise that lately I've just been sort of talking to a camera a lot. So I want to get back into showing you how I make things, sort of the step-by-step process, I suppose. So until next time, hope you have a good one.